Today's shiur will begin from the bottom line of Daf Lamed Daled Amid Beis. We are continuing with the discussion concerning the Meraglim, the spies that were sent by Moshe Rabbeinu to scout out the land of Israel prior to their entrance. The entrance, that is, of the Jewish people. The Gemara quotes a pasuk from Bamidbar, Perek Yud Gimel, and as we look at our Gemara, there will be a partial quote from pasuk Chav Hey and pasuk Chavav. So on the side of the Gemara, just for a sense of greater completion, we've included pasuk Chav Hey, which reads Vayashuvu mitur haaretz miketz arboim yoim, and pasuk Chavav begins Vayelchu vayavohu el Moshe ve'el Aharon, etc. So our Gemara says Vayashuvu mitur haaretz, and the spies returned from their scouting of the land. We continue at the top of Daf Lamed Hey, Vayelchu vayavohu. The Rashi points out Lo garsinon uksiv elo vayelchu yiserahu. The word vayelchu is an extra word. Kevon dichsiv liel vayashuvu lo havalei lemeimar elo vayavo el Moshe. Since it already said that they returned, as we read at the beginning of pasuk Chav Hey, vayashuvu mitur haaretz, they returned from their sojourn. There's no need to add the word vayelchu, simply vayavo el Moshe. So from the presence of this extra word, Omar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, Makish Halicha Labia, their initial departure there is compared to their return. Ma bia be'etzorah, just like upon their return we become familiar with their evil counsel because of what they said. Af halicha be'etzorah, so to their initial departure was characterized by a scheme to speak evil of the land of Israel. In other words, their evil report was not a function simply of their trip. That was actually part of their original scheme before they went on their scouting mission. The pasuk says, "Vayisapru lo, vayomru bonu, v'chulei, etc." Uksiv efes kiaz ha'om. Omar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Meir Kol Lashon Hora she'ein bo dover emes b'tchilaso ein miskayim b'sofo. When one wants to speak ill of somebody or something, if there isn't, as we say in English, we say if there isn't a grain of truth, here it says if there isn't some truth in the beginning, so it won't be accepted at the end. So that in their report, they had to say some element of truth. Otherwise, they would have been relegated as being liars. So too, they spoke initially about the praiseworthiness of the land, and then they went on to say things concerning the power of the people there, and we will be incapable of defeating them. Where there you're already getting into the lies. We have a topic heading on the side. The Nosei reads Vayaz Kolev Esa'am el Moshe. Kolev, who was one of the two righteous, pious ones amongst the scouts. Eich Kolev diber el ha'am mul shar hamraglim. How did Kolev manage to communicate his message in the face of the other spies that were giving a dismal report? So the pasuk says, "Vayas Kolev es ha'am el Moshe, Omar Rabba shehesiton b'dvorim." Now the word Vayahas means literally he silenced them. But from the Gemara, it appears that we're making a drasha shehesiton. He tried to inflame through words, and we'll see what was inflammatory about Kolev. Kolev noticed that Yoshua was speaking, and Yoshua tried to speak up, and the people didn't even want to listen to him. Omri lay, the other Meraglim silenced him. Dain Rosh Ketia Yamalel, this cut off one, should Yamalel means to speak. Now, what is the reference to Yoshua as the cut off one? Literally, the Rosh Ketil means the head, the one with the cut off head. The cut off one is a reference to the fact that Yehoshua did not have any sons. He didn't have any sons that would inherit a portion of the land. So how can someone who, as a disinterested party, he doesn't have any children to get a portion of land, how can he speak up? So that's how they silenced Yehoshua. Omar, so Kalev, who was the only other righteous one, says, I mishte'ina, if I try to speak, Amri bi milsa v'chasminli, they're going to say something to me and shut me up also. So Omar lohen, so Kalev said to them, V'chizu bilvad osa lanu ben Amram, is this all that the son of Amram did? And now the term ben Amram is an offhanded way in referring to Moshe Rabbeinu. Savri, so they figured beginusei komishtoi, that he's going to be one of us and he's going to speak derogatorily of him. Ishtiku, so they remained quiet. Omar lahu, and then Kalev continued and said, Hotzionu mi Mitzrayim, v'koranu lono es hamon, v'koranu lono es hayom, v'chilonu es hamon. He led us out of Mitzrayim. He split the sea. He provided mon for us. Im yomar asu sulamois ve'alu rukia lo nishmalo. If he says, make ladders and arise heavenwards, would we not listen to him? Alo na'lev yorashnu osa. Pasuk goes on to say, Ki yachol nuchala. We will ascend into the land, inherit, because we certainly can. That was Pasuk Lamed. Pasuk Lamed Aleph, it says, V'anoshim asher olu imo, amru lo nuchal. And the Pasuk goes on to say, La'alois eloam, ki chazoku mimenu. They immediately refuted, responded in refutation to what Kalev says. That the men that were with the other Meraglim said, we will not be able to. And they used in Hebrew the expression, ki chazoku mimenu. And here, as we said in our previous shiur, the word mimenu can mean more than us. That's mimenu then would be, let's say, first person plural, and it could also mean mimenu, him, third person singular. So the Gemara points out, Omar Rabbi Chanina bar Papa, Dovar Godol Dibru Meraglim Ba'oisa Shah. The spies said something literally very big, but it means something of a disastrous nature. Ki chazakhu mimenu, kiviyachol, as if to say, balabayas einu yochol lahotzi kelov misham. The homeowner, that's a reference to the Almighty, can't go into his own house to take out his own vessels. In other words, the inhabitants of the land are so mighty, more so even than the Almighty Himself. And of course, that is blasphemous. And that's what the Gemara meant when Reb Chanina said, "Dover Godol Dibru Meraglim B'Yisashah." They said something blasphemous. They said, Eretz Oicheles Yoshvelhi, it's a land that consumes its inhabitants. Dorash Rava. Omar HaKodesh Baruch Hu, Ani Chashavtia L'Toiva, Vehem Choshvoi L'Ra'ah. And with the diamonds, we're going to emphasize these two aspects. I say is the Kodesh Baruch Hu had actually planned for their benefit, and they reversed it. They took it the wrong way, so to speak. And the Gemara explains, Ani chashavti l'tova dechol hecha demotu, wherever the spies arrived in their scouting mission. Don't forget, they're basically scouting out enemy territory. The inhabitant nations eventually would war with the Jews, so they represented an enemy force. So wherever the spies reached, Meis Chashiva Didhu, one of their important people, leaders, died. Kihechi denitridu v'lo lishalu abasrayu, so that they would be preoccupied with their respective state funerals, so that they would be, as we say, nitridu, be preoccupied with that, and not look into questioning these guys. Who are you? They're referring to the spies. So they'd be able to get on their mission without being endangered. The Ikad Yamri, another explanation of what happened, was Eov Noch Nafshe, that when the spies arrived, Eov, according to this opinion, he lived at that time, and he was a member of the Canaanite peoples. He was not Jewish, and he happened to be very great, a very righteous man, and he died at that time. There was a massive eulogy for Eov, and hence, as we indicated before, the locals were preoccupied with that, and thereby enabling the spies to go on their mission unharmed. Haim choshvoi l'ra, but those very spies took it the wrong way. They saw the land, people preoccupied with matters of death. So they said, Eretz ocheles yeshvel, it's a land that consumes its inhabitants. Unehi beinenu kachagavim, v'chein hoyinu beinehem. The pasuk says the spies reported that we, in our eyes, were like locusts, and we were thusly in their eyes. Amar Rav Misharshia, and here we're going to have, there are like two approaches. Rav Misharshia, and then the Gemara is going to respond. He says, Meraglim Shakri Havu, the Meraglim were liars. And you see their lying capacity in this pasuk. Granted, they can say that we, in our eyes, were like locusts. That's a question of self-perception. You perceive yourself as whatever, so that's what they said. You don't see any element of lie in that. And we thusly were in their eyes, in the eyes of the locals, we were like locusts. Mino havu yadi. How did the spies know what was in the mind of the local inhabitants? And yet they said it. So you see from there their capacity for falsehood. Velo hi. And here the Gemara says that's not proof. Ki havu mavri aveli. Mavri is an expression referring to meals that friends and neighbors serve people that are in mourning. So we mentioned before that there was death in the land when the Meraglim were present. So when the people were serving food to the mourners, Tusi Arzi Havu Mavri, they would serve their food under Erez trees, Erez type of tree. And this was the summer months. It was warm outside, and people would eat outdoors in the shade of trees. V'chichazinu, when they were noticed, when the locals noticed the spies, salku yasvi be'ilni, the spies ran up the trees for protection. And Shami the Ko'amri, and the spies heard the locals saying, Kochazinin inshi dedamu the kamtzi bilni. We see men, human forms that look like they're like the size of locusts in the trees. So when the spies said, and thusly we were in their eyes, so they were not lying with that statement either. My assumption is that as we saw in our previous year, they certainly in Hebron there were giants, and in general the physical proportions of the local inhabitants might have been such that they were much larger in size physically than the Jewish spies, and hence the image of locusts that look like human beings would be fitting if you accept that premise. Now we continue with another pasuk from Perek Yud Daled of Bamidbar, pasuk Aleph. Vatisa kol eda vayitnu es kolam vayivku. Upon hearing the report of the spies, so the nation reacted with a raised voice and crying. Omar Rabba, Omar Rabbi Yochanan, Oiso Hayom Erev Tisha B'Av Hoya. That day, when the spies came with their report, It was the eve of the 9th of Av. Omar HaKodesh Baruch Hu, the Almighty. And one has to get into, we'll say, the spirit of this calamitous event. Here, they were on the threshold of entering the land of Israel, which was part of the Almighty's master plan. Besides the ultimate building of the Beis Hamikdash, the bringing of the Jewish people into, as it's referred to, the promised land, or the Holy Land, the land of Israel. This was something that the Almighty was so much, if we speak in human terms, Kivyoch, was so much looking forward to. And here these guys are coming to mess up the plan and bringing the whole nation down with them. The Almighty sees this reaction. Instead of one of great joy and festivity, here we're entering the land of Israel. Here the nation is crying and moaning and groaning about their entrance to the land. So the Almighty says, Hein bochu b'chia shel chilam. They cried a vain cry. Vani ekba lohem b'chia l'doros. And I'm going to establish for them something to cry about for generations. And I'm sure all of you know that the 9th of Av was the day in which the Botei Mikdash were destroyed, and it represents the day that of the formerly invincible Jewish people became prey to the nations of the world, and the ultimate exile and sojourn in the diaspora set in from that day onwards. And all calamities that befall the Jewish people are essentially extensions of the 9th of Av, of Tisha B'Av. Up till that event, as we indicated before, the Jewish people remained victorious in all of their wars, and no nation had control over them. There were temporary periods of Philistine wars, etc., but the Jewish people nevertheless were in their own land, and in that sense they were considered a power to contend with. But once Tisha B'Av befell, that's the basis of Bechiyah L'Doros, a cry for generations. Pasuk Yud says, "Vayomru kol ha'edah lirgoim oisam ba'avonim, uksiv ukchoy Hashem nira be'el moyed." The Pasuk Yud says that the nation was planning to stone them, and in the simple reading, to stone them, Yoshua and Kolev, on anyone who still wanted to go into the land. And then it says, and the glory of God appeared in the Mishkan. Omar Rabbi Chia bar Abba Melamed. This pasuk tells us, or teaches us, Shenot lo avonim v'zorkum klaping mala. They took stones and they intended to throw them even heavenwards. Of course, a physical act of blasphemy, if you will. The men who spoke ill of the land, the spies, they died in, and here in Hebrew, the vowelization can make all of the difference. The word here is ba ma gefa. We're saying a pshat right now that's based on the Rashi commentary. Tosfos has a different take on this, but for the meantime, in the plague, not in a plague, but in the plague. So the patach under the base, ba magefo, and the plague indicates a unique type of death. Tosfos, on the other hand, emphasizes the word ra'ah. The pasuk says those who spoke ill of the dibas hearts ra'ah b'magefa, that the drush is combining the word ra'ah with the word magefa, a bad plague. And whichever way you go, the Omar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish shemesu miso meshuna, they died a strange death. There are two approaches to what was the cause of death of the Meraglim. Omar Rabbi Chanina bar Papa Dorash Rav Shilo Ish Kfar Tamrasa Reb Chanina quotes that which Reb Shilo taught. Ish Kfar Tamrasa is the place from which Reb Shilo was from. He said, Malamed, the pasuk tells us, Shenishtarbev l'shoinam. Nishtarbev is a word indicating lengthening. Their tongues became lengthened. They came out of their mouths, and the nafal tiburam, and the tongue became so elongated that it reached their navels. V'hayu toiloyim yoitzus milashonim v'nichnasus betiburam u'mitiburam v'nichnasus b'lashonam, and worms emerged from their tongues, entering their navels, and from their navels entering their tongues. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchok Omar ba'askara mesu. They died through the askara ailment, which is a type of throat ailment that eventually results in strangulation. And askara is the disease that's associated with those who speak lashon hara, speak ill. And in this case, the Meraglim, they spoke lashon hara of the evil speech concerning the land of Israel. And for all of us who are listening to this particular shiur and all else, should take this very much to heart, to be very careful, never, ever, ever to speak ill of any aspect, and I emphasize any aspect of the land of Israel. If people have something to say, and they're in the position to correct things that they feel need correction, so be it. So their speech is associated with the desire and the effort to improve matters. But if you have no role and no power and no position of making any difference, and have some type of complaint or gripe or whatever, however true it may be in your mind, one should keep it to themselves when it comes to speaking about any aspect of the land of Israel. And I can't emphasize the severity of that sin of speaking ill to this very day, of course, concerning the land of Israel. And I emphasize once again, any aspect, without specifying details. I will certainly leave that to the wisdom of each listener. We indicate here that the continuation of the Gemara, which you see in a frame, is a continuation of the Tanaic source that started way back on Daf Lamed Daled Amud Aleph. This is a quote from the Tosefta of Perek Ches. V'kevon she'olu ha'achron sheb'Yisrael min ha'Yarden. Hopefully you will recall, even without looking back on our previous daf, that we were describing the crossing of the Jewish people into the land of Israel in the time of Yoshua. So here we are resuming that period. So when we described in our previous shiur, which cited the earlier part of this source, that the Jordan River had, well, for lack of better expression, had split, where the waters had reached great heights, enabling the Jewish people to cross into the land of Israel. And the source says that when the last of the Jewish people rose up on the western bank of the Jordan, Chazru Mayim L'Mekoman, the water resumed their normal flow. Shenemar v'hi ba'alois hakenim noisei aron bris Hashem mitoch hayarden nisku kapois ragle kanem el charova v'yoshuvu mei hayarden l'mekoimon v'yelchu kismol shilsham al kol gedoisov. The pasuk describes the Kohanim who had been carrying the Aron Hashem. The Kohanim, had stepped into the water, and that caused the water to split, thereby enabling the Jewish people to cross into the land. And the Kohanim then walked backwards from their position. They walked simply into the water from the eastern bank, walked into the water. In the meantime, the rest of the Jewish people walked by them onto the western bank. And here the pasuk describes the Kohanim returning to the eastern bank, and the water, after of course all the people crossed the river, and the water then resumed its flow as it normally did yesterday and the day before. And now the Gemara comments, this Tanaic source describes the scene. Nimsa Aroy v'noisa v'kohanim mitzad echad, v'Yisrael mitzad echad. The result then of this is the Aron and those that were carrying it and the Kohanim were on one side of the river, and the Jewish people were on the other side of the river. Well, now the water is flowing regularly. Well, how are the Kohanim and the Aron going to get across? Nosa Aron es noisov v'ovar. Shenemar, this is miraculous. The Aron, the Holy Ark, had poles, long poles on either side, two long poles that give I should say they were there giving the impression that you would carry the Aron with it, but in truth, the Aron actually carried those that were with it. It miraculously suspended the people above the ground, hovering over the ground, so to speak, and it carried them across. Shenemar, the Pasuk says, "Vayika shir tom kolam lavor," and when the tom means completed, when the whole nation completed their passage over the river, through the river, Vayavor Aron Hashem v'konim lefnei ha'am. The Aron enabled the Kohanim to cross over to the people. You notice we have a brackets in this Tanaic source. These brackets are not for skipping purposes, but simply to create a sense of connection between that which was set up till the brackets and the continuation of the Gemara later on. What we're going to see here is in the Tanaic source a story that's related to the Aron, but later in history is featured, and then the Gemara gets off onto that later discussion. When you get to the Gemara in Amid Beis, in the middle of the Amid, the Gemara returns to this period of time, the crossing of the Yarden. Before we continue with the Gemara text, maybe a general word of a historical value. The Aron, for most of the years after they entered the land, until the building of the Beis Hamikdash, for 369 of those 440 years, namely from the entrance to the land to the building of the Beis Hamikdash by King Solomon, that was a period of 440 years. For 369 of those years, the Mishkan stood in Shiloh, and in that Mishkan there was a Kodesh HaKadoshim, a Holy of Holies, in which the Holy Ark, the Aron Habris containing the Aser Sedibros, the Luchos, the tablets, was located. At the end of the Mishkan period, the head of the Jewish people at the time was the high priest Eli HaKohen, and when he reached old age, the prophet Samuel was born and emerged. He himself emerged as a leader, and he anointed King Saul, who reigned for a relatively short amount of time, 2-3 years, and following his reign, basically King David emerged, who ruled for 40 years, 7 years in Hebron, maybe 7.5 years, and 33 years in Yerushalayim. During all these years, the time of Shmuel and Saul, Shaul HaMelech, and David HaMelech, the Aron was not located in the Mishkan, because the Mishkan actually was destroyed at that point, at the point of Eli's death. And where the Aron was located, so there were different locations, let's put it that way, and in the course of time, during that period, there was also a period of time that it was actually taken into captivity by the Philistines. There was a constant warring, strife-filled period during those years. and the Aron eventually was taken back, was restored to the possession of the Jewish people, and eventually it was taken from one place to another. I'm leaving out all the details. For that, we highly recommend looking into the relevant sections of the Tanakh and Shmuel, Sefer Shmuel. You can see where these things are referred to. They're simply different sections. You have in Shmuel Aleph and in Shmuel Beis different sections that deal with we'll say these historical details. Now, during one of these episodes of moving the Aron, a gentleman by the name of Ozer, he tried to, we'll say, grab and hold on to the Aron for fear of it slipping off a cart and falling onto the floor. And now we pick up the Gemara text, V'al Dover Zeh, regarding this matter, the matter that we just saw in the Gemara, that the Aron carried those that supposedly carried it. On this matter, Ne'nash Uzo was punished. Shenemar vayavo ad Goren Kidon vayishlach Uzo es yodo lechois es Haron. They reached a place called Goren Kidon, and Uzo extended his arm, his hand to grab the Aron. Omar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Almighty says, Uzo, nosav nasa, the ones that were designated to carry the Aron carried them. Atzmo lo kol sheken. You don't think that the Aron could carry itself? Vayichar af Hashem be'uza vayakeu sham al hashal. And the Almighty became enraged with Uzzah, and he smote him down over there, al hashal. Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Ozer, Chad Omar al iske shelo. Shelo means a mistake, that he was punished for his mistake of trying to grab the Aron. V'chad Omar, a different approach is she'osot tzrochav befonov. The word shel comes from the word noshal. Noshal is something that falls or descends. Person's what he was guilty of is that he relieved himself of his human waste in the presence of the Aron. Obviously, not viewing the Aron with the necessary level of holiness due to it, he felt he could relieve himself in its presence. And for that, the Almighty killed Uzzah. Vayomos sham im Aron ha'elokim. That's what the pasuk says in Shmuel Beis Perek Vav pasuk Zayin, and he died there next to, while with the Aron. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Uzzah ba le'olam haba. Uzzah will enter the world to come. In other words, God did kill him, but that's not a reflection on what his soul would experience in the world to come. Shenemar im Aron ha'elokim, because in the pasuk describing Uzzah's death, it says together with the holy ark. Ma Aron le'olam kayim, just like the ark is forever. Af Uzzah ba le'olam haba. So too Uzzah merits the entrance to we'll say entrance to paradise. The pasuk there says, "Vayichar leDavid al asher paratz Hashem peretz beUzzah." We mentioned before the historical period. So at this point, when Uzzah was killed, it was at the point at which David HaMelech was the reigning figure, and David was angry with what happened, with that which God expressed his anger with Uzzah. So the word Vayichar leDavid, Omar Rebbe Ozer, Shinishtanu Ponav Ke'Charora. His face changed to looking like a charora is a hot cake. That's Rashi says Uga she'oifen al penei hegecholim. It's a type of baked good that's baked on coals. That is supposed to create a certain imagery regarding the wrath that David felt upon this incident. The Gemara asks, Elo me'ato kol hechod dechsi vayichar hochinami? Are we then to interpret the word Vayichar in all places that there's this major facial transformation like we just described? The Gemara says no. We're not going to use this explanation and apply it to wherever you see the word Vayichar. Hosam ksiv af, hacha lo ksiv af. In general, you see the word Vayichar together with the word af, Vayichar af. That's an expression of rage, of anger. But here, you see the word Vayichar without the word af. Af is a word that can mean either nose or apayim, face. His face got angry. But here, you have the word Vayichar without the word af, so it lends itself to a special interpretation that Shinishtanu Ponov Kecharor, that is this facial transformation into what appeared to be a cake baked on coals. Dorash Rava, Mipnei Ma Nenash David. And here's if we translate this, I don't think you'll get the full idea, but literally he raises the question, well, for what reason was David punished? Well, we don't see that David was punished per se, but we see that under the leadership of David, this man Uzzah died. That itself is considered a form of punishment, of retribution, that you as a leader have someone under your command dying. So Rav is asking, why did this happen to David? Nay, shekara l'divrei Torah zemiros, because David referred to Torah and the Aron and the Luchos. In fact, the Gemara in Bava Basra says there was a Sefer Torah that was in the Aron as well. Ein Ba'aron Rak is darshaned. That's one of two opinions that you see there. The Sefer Torah, the Torah is associated with the Aron either physically or certainly symbolically. And David had referred to Divrei Torah, to the study of Torah, to the Torah and its contents as Zmiros. Zmiros might be translated as song, and he referred to it as Zmiros, an offhanded expression. It's when referring to Torah, and here you'll see how the Gemara illustrates that. Shenemar, David HaMelech said, Zmiros hoyu li chukecha beveis megurai. I'm quite convinced that David HaMelech had, we'll say, pure intention. It just didn't come out the right way. David HaMelech was very much in love with Torah. He had we'll say, a romantic association with Torah. No question about that. That's illustrated quite clearly not only by the study of Sefer Tehillim, but through the Talmud itself. You see numerous references to this. So David describes Torah, for me, was like song, something that one does out of joy. However, that's not, according to the Torah, a significant amount of respect and say glory that's due to the Torah. As nice as music and song is, it's something that one does without much concentration. A person can sing a tune, the words can flow out without a person exerting much effort to remember it. And the Gemara says elsewhere, on a number of occasions, where Abaye you find reacting to Rav Yosef, who, in response to things that were said, Rav Yosef will say, well, what difference does it make about whatever topic under discussion? What difference does this detail make? And Abaye will respond, Gemara Zemorta Tehei. It's the study of Gemara, the study of Torah, like a song. And the Meforshim point out that when one is singing a song, the amount of precision necessary to get the song across isn't that demanding. You can mess up on a phrase here and there, bunch two words together when they should have been separated, and still the song comes out all right. So Torah, on the other hand, shouldn't be viewed like that. Just like Abaye says, the study of Torah is like a song, he says in Wonderment. And here, David HaMelech is referring to the Torah. Chukecha means your laws, your teachings are unto me like a song. So, Omar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Divrei Torah, Shekosuv Bohen, the words of Torah concerning which the Pasuk in Mishlei says, Hatoif Einecha Bo V'Einenu. All you, Toif Einecha is a reference, you merely close your eyes. Even momentarily, your mind leaves Torah. It is no longer. It flies away. Toif also, you have the word off in there. The word off is to fly. Like a bird is called an oaf. Me'ofef is to flutter, to fly. And by a mere momentary hesech hadas, one stops his concentration on Torah. It's no longer showing you how sensitive and how dedicated and concentrated one must be when it comes to Torah study. Ata korei oison zmiros, you referred to the Torah as zmiros, as song, and as we explained at some length already, song doesn't require that great amount of concentration. Hareini machshilcha, so the Almighty says, you call my Torah song, I'm going to cause you to stumble, bedovar, in a matter, shafilu tinoikis shel beis rabim yoidin oisoi, a matter that even children know otherwise. Dichtiv, the Pasuk says, and this is probably a reference to children. Children are given to knowing Chumash. Chumash contains the 5 books of Moses, including Sefer Bamidbar, and it says in Sefer Bamidbar, Perek Zayin Pasuk Tes, Ulivnei Kahos Lo Nosan Ki Avodas HaKodesh Aleim B'Kosef Yiso. It says there that unto the Levites, the Levium from the Kahos family, the Levium were divided into the 3 sons of Levi, Gershon, Kahos, and Merari. Kahos was assigned the task of caring for the vessels of the Mishkan, the Beis Hamikdash, and the Bnei Kahos, when it came to the, as opposed to, let's say, the outer structure of the Mishkan, so the boards and the beams and the other materials were transported through the desert in carts, in agolas. Unto the Kahos people, the Pasuk says, they were not given carts for the transportation of the Aron, because they, and the other vessels as well, they had poles. And here we're focusing for our discussion on the Aron. Kahos didn't have an Aron. They didn't have carts. And amongst the vessels that they carried was the Holy Ark. And V'ihu, David, Asya, Ba'galta, and when it came to the transportation of the Aron, he transported it in a cart. And it didn't need that. You can see this, that David had a cart for it, by looking in Shmuel Beis, Perek Vav, Pasuk Gimel. So, as in response to David HaMelech's the light-handed, let's say, description of the Torah, the Almighty showed David HaMelech, you think the Torah is a matter that you come by easily? Here's something even children know, and you're going to make a mistake on it. And as a result of that, the suffering that befell upon the death of Uzzah could all be traced to this. Bear in mind, I'm sure it's obvious to most of you, but I'll say it anyway, that when it comes to the great members of our people, the major righteous figures, the Almighty will magnify their even slightest, we'll say, deviations. I hesitate using the word sin, but their slightest, let's say, wrongful decisions, and hold them accountable. And we, the lesser ones amongst us, are to learn from that. There's a message that we get from it, and I think it's quite clear how one is supposed to appreciate Torah when Hebrew we use the term koved rosh, with seriousness and concentration. and all that implies. We continue with another incident, but this time we're quoting from Shmuel Aleph. Up till now, in the last few lines, we were dealing with a later point in history, Shmuel Beis, the second book of Samuel. Here we're going back in time, Shmuel Aleph, and this too refers to incidents concerning the Oron. It says in the Pasuk, and here Shmuel Aleph, Perek Vav Pasuk Yud Tes, it says, Vayach be'anshe Beis Shemesh ki ro'u ba'oron. Beis Shemesh is a city in Israel, and it says the people of Beis Shemesh were smitten because they saw the Oron. And the Gemara asks with a wonderment, Mishum dero vayach, because they saw the Oron, they were killed. Now, a double underline is used to highlight the names Rabbi Avo, Rabbi Ozer. The two Amoraim appear, each one giving their own opinion, and you'll see this repeat structure with regard to another pasuk that's darshaned on Amud Beis. So in the meantime, Rabbi Avo, Rabbi Ozer, Chalamar, Kaitzrin u'mishtachavim hayu, these people of Beit Shemesh saw the Oron passing by while they were involved with their harvest. They didn't even bother stopping their malacha, their harvest, to honor the Oron. And the word ra'u is an expression indicating disparagement. As Rashi said, Loshon bizoyon. And that disparagement was by their simply carrying on their work as if nothing special was happening, when in fact the Oron was in their presence. V'chad omar mili nami omor. Another approach we have here, Rabbi Avo and Rabbi Ozer, and the other one says they actually said things as well. And what is it that they said? This is not a quote from the pasuk, but it's what they said. And we should point out that we didn't spell out the historical background here, but what had happened was that the Oron had been taken into captivity by the Philistines, and this incident is taking place at the point of its return. And if you study the Psukim, you see that the return of the Oron was under somewhat miraculous circumstances, and the people were saying in an offhanded fashion to the Oron, Man amorech de imrius, uman osa alach de ephisis. That's Aramaic. We look in the Rashi. Man amorech de amrayes. The word amoraich might very well come from the word mar as an expression of bitterness and rage. So Rashi says, Mi hich ischa she ko'asta v'loitzaltes atzmecha. Who got you angry so much so that you didn't try to save yourself? They're speaking to the Oron, which of course had manifest, we'll say, miraculous powers. Of course, every power is from the Almighty, but it had the powers that we've seen to carry those that carried it. So it had its own internal locomotion. And what is it they said to the Oron that caused you to be so angry that you didn't bother saving yourself, min hashvia, from captivity? Ve'ato, and now, mi mefaisoch kishenispayasto lavo me'alecha. Who appeased you? Mephais is to appease. Who appeased you now that you decided to come back from captivity on your own? Okay, that's what they said. They were being quite, sarcastic in their remarks, but they were saying it to the Oron. The Oron, Bris Hashem. And for that, they paid a very heavy price. And the Pasuk says, Vayach ba'om shivim ish v'chamishim elef ish. Here we'll translate. There was smitten amongst the people 70 people and 50,000 people. Somewhat unusual way of presenting numbers. So here we have two approaches, the same Rabbonim, Rabbi Avo, Rabbi Ozer. Chad omar shivim ish hayu. There were actually 70 people that were killed in that incident. Each one of those 70 people was a very significant person. Each one was equal to 50,000, we'll say, regular people. The other approach to the pasuk with its numbers is 50,000 hayu. It was a major disaster of 50,000 people were killed. And each one of those 50,000 people were significant, like the 70 members of Sanhedrin. The pasuk continues. Now here we're going forward, because you can see we're quoting from Shmuel Beis, Perek Vav, the story involving David HaMelech, and the story following the event with Uzzah. This is Shmuel Beis, Perek Vav, and this is now pasuk Yud Gimel. When we saw previously the reference to Perek Vav, we were dealing with Uzzah's death, covering psukim Zayin and Ches. So here we're moving ahead in that incident. It says, "Vayihi ki tzadu noisei aron Hashem shisha tzeadim vayizbach shor umri." So one pasuk says, when the carriers of the Aron took 6 steps, they sacrificed shor, oxen, mari, sheep. Uksiv shiva param v'shiva elim. Instead of shor umri, here you have the shor will be 1 ox and 1 sheep. Here you have a pasuk that says shiva param, 7 cows and 7 rams. This is a pasuk from Divrei Hayomim. The book of Divrei Hayomim, the book of Chronicles, essentially parallels the rest of Tanakh, but many times you see the same incident referred to, but with changes in details. And here you have that exact situation. The pasuk in Shmuel Beis says Shor Umri, and pasuk in Divrei Hayomim, which parallels that incident, says 7 of each. Omar Rav Papa Bar Shmuel, and we have 2 approaches. This is the first. He says, Al kol psio psio shomri. For every step that they took a step, stopped, and offered sacrifices. That means that would mean that they had to build a type of altar, a temporary altar, and offer the sacrifice. That's for every step they took, they would offer a sacrifice. And I'll call sheish v'sheish psius. And at the end of every set of 6 steps, shiva param v'shiva elim, 7 cows and 7 rams. Amar le Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says to Rav Papa Shmuel, Im Kain, if every step they took, they were building an altar and offering sacrifices, milesas kol eretz Yisrael bamos, then you've filled the entire land with bamos. These are altars. They're like single stone altars. And my impression is that if every step you took there were altars, you wouldn't be able to cross the area. Elom Rav Chisda. So Rav Chisda says the numbers are a bit different. I'll call sheish v'sheish psiyas shomri. After every 6 steps, they would offer an ox and a sheep, so that you didn't have a continuous wall of altars, because there was a gap between each altar, 6 steps between each one. I'll call shisha sedarim shel sheish psiyas, and after 6 sets of 6 steps, then shiva parim v'shiva elim. Needless to say that according to Rav Chisda's approach, still there would be many altars located over there, but there was at least room to cut through, according to Rav Chisda. Ksiv kidon uksiv nachon. We saw a reference to this pasuk on Amud Aleph, to one of these 2 psukim. 9 lines from the bottom of Amud Aleph, the pasuk had said, "Vayavo ad Goren Kidon, vayishlach Uzzah es yodo echazes Aron." They reached a place that we called Goren Kidon, and it's there that Uzzah extended his arm. So that was a pasuk from Divrei Hayomim Aleph Perek Yud Gimel. That's as far as the reference to the word kidon. Kidon is actually a spear. And uksiv nochon in Shmuel Beis Perek Vav, which is the parallel to the Divrei Hayomim pasuk, it says nochon instead of the word kidon. Amar Rabbi Yochanan betchila kidon ulebesof nochon. To appreciate this, we look in the Rashi. We're looking at the upper part of the narrow lines, about the fifth narrow line of Rashi, Betchila, Kishebo Oron Sham Nase Lohem Kikidon HaHoreg Shahoraguza. When the Oron arrived there in that story, it was like a spear. It resulted in the death of Uzzah. Uzzah died as a result of the wrongful handling of the Oron. The Oron then caused his death. In that story, and of course by studying the verses you'll see what happened. It stayed for 6 months in the home of a fellow by the name of Oved Edom. Nase Nochon. Things were then Nochon is proper or established. Shehechin is Beso. The Oron was responsible for great blessing that Oved Edom experienced. Dichtiv Vayavarach Hashem es Oved Edom Ishto shel Oved Edom u'shmoine kaleisel yoldu Shisha bekeres echad. The wife of Oved Edom and his 8 daughters-in-law had tremendous births. They had births 6. I guess you would call them sextuplets, 6 in each bellyful, if you will. V'hainu dichtiv po'alti hashmini ki borchu elokim uksivachakach shishim u'shnayim le'Oved Edom. And the pasuk says, makes reference to 62 children, descendants from Oved Edom. Let's turn back to the Gemara, and you can see the bracketed section closes. And if you recall our note from before, we now go back in time to Yehoshua and the crossing of the Yarden, and we're picking up with Tosefta Periches, as you can see indicated on the side. Nimseis ata oimer shloisha mine avonim hoyu. Regarding the incident of the crossing of the Yarden, and in our previous shiurim we made references to stones, so here we're tallying up the different stone occasions. On the side of the Gemara, let us note the nosei/mivne heading. A diamond is featured, and we indicate Gimel mine avonim hakshurim leknisas Yisrael Oretz. 3 types of stones. The word type, you can say it means 3 different, let's say, references to stones that are pertinent to the entrance of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. So let's continue in the Gemara. Echad shehekim Moshe be'eva hayardin beretz Moav. One stone incident involved Moshe Rabbeinu on the eastern bank of the Yarden in the land of Moav. Shenemar be'eva hayardin beretz Moav hoyul Moshe be'er v'chulei u'lahalon hu omer v'chosafta aleim es kol divrei haTorah hazos ba'er heitev. We are quoting from 2 separate sections of Sefer Dvarim. In Dvarim Perek Aleph Pasuk Hey, which is a reference, is a geographical reference to Moshe Rabbeinu in Eretz Moav, it says that Hoyul Moshe Be'er. And in Dvarim Perek Chav Zayin, Psukim Gimel through Ches, here the Gemara is very terse. It skips a lot of Psukim. It quotes in Perek Chav Zayin, the beginning of Pasuk Gimel, it says V'chosafto alehem es kol divrei haTorah zos, and there's a pronoun. It says here he wrote upon them. The reference to upon them, the them are stones that were referenced in Pasuk Beis. Perek Chav Zayin Pasuk Beis, you can see a reference to stones. In Pasuk Gimel it says, and Moshe wrote upon them all of the Torah, and it says there in the continuation of the Psukim, I said you should read through till Pasuk Ches, you see the term Be'er Heitev. V'asya Be'er Be'er. And here you have the Gezerah Shava, Be'er Be'er, and through that Gezerah Shava you make a connection between that which it said in Dvarim Perek Aleph Pasuk Hey, and this, and we therefore understand that in Dvarim Perek Aleph, the reference there were to stones, and namely the stones that Moshe Rabbeinu set up in Eretz Moav. So that's one incident. The Echad Shehekim Yehoshua B'soch HaYarden, another reference to stones, or the stones that Yehoshua set up in the Jordan River. We recommend to study Perek Daled, the fourth parak of Sefer Yoshua. And also in our Mark Gemaras, we had a note back on Daf Lamed Daled Amud Aleph, the note on the side, which begins with the words Ha'avonim Shehuzkaru. We recommend looking back over there to the note. So in the meantime, the second stones referred to are the stones that Yoshua set up in the Jordan River, and V'echad Shehekim Begilgal, a third set of stones that were set up in Gilgal. Those are the stones that were brought to the Har Grizim, Har Eval, and that same day were brought to Gilgal, where they spent the night. Shenemar v'shtei misrei ho'avonim ho'ela asher lokhu v'chulei. There's a Rashi across from here about Gilgal. La'achar shebonu mehem hamizbeh b'Har Eval. After they had set up the altar in Har Eval, kiplum v'vium l'Gilgal v'kovum sham. They folded them up, so to speak, and brought them back to Gilgal, those 12 stones, and set them up over there. Before we continue, we glance at the side. We have a nosei, topic heading, which reads Ksivas HaTorah al Hamizbeach B'Har Eval, the writing of the Torah on the altar at Har Eval. Of course, we're assuming, as we often do in Gemara markings, that this is not your, let's say, first shiur that you're listening to, but you've been following along till now. So you will recall that we made references to the blessings and curses that took place at Har Grizim and Har Eval near the area of Shechem, and we're now referring to the altar that was set up over there, and then, as we just indicated, the stones were we'll say dismantled and brought to Gilgal. Tanu Rabbanan, Ketzad Kosfu Yisrael es HaTorah. How was the Torah written by the Jewish people on those stones that were set up as an altar at Har Eval? And, what actually took place physically, you have here two opinions. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Al Gabi Avonim Kosvua. The Torah was written on the stones. Now, here, we're not going to get into what exactly is meant. They wrote the Torah on the stones, how much was written, what was written, etc. That is something that if you look into the various commentaries, you'll see different opinions as to what was actually written there. Rabbi Yehuda, though, says that it was written directly on the stones. Shenemar v'chosafta al avonim es kol divrei haTorah zos ba'er etev. The pasuk in Dvarim Perach of Zion says, and they were to be written on the stones, the entire Torah, ba'er etev. And we're going to come back to that expression later. V'achar kach, and after the Torah was written on the stones, sadu oison b'sid. They were then coated over with sid. Sid is often translated as a lime covering, white paint, if you will, white lime coating. Omar lo Rabbi Shimon. So Rabbi Shimon says to Rabbi Yehuda, lidvarecha, according to your approach, hech lomdu umois shel oisoi hazman Torah. How did the nations of the world of that time study Torah? The Rashi across from here says, hech lomdu umois olam ho'atikot, the Umos Olam of the old generations of that time. How did they learn Torah? Halo lo nitztavu l'koisva b'shivim lashon. Here Rashi is revealing that by eretev means that it was well explained, meaning was translated into 70 languages. The writing of the Torah wasn't just the contents of the Torah, but was in 70 different languages. Why was it written in 70 different languages? The Jewish people didn't need the translations. They knew their language was Hebrew. Elo lavo lulamdo kol haroitze. It was translated into 70 different languages for the nations of the world to come, anyone who would want. That when the Almighty would come with a complaint against the nations of the world, why didn't you keep the Torah? They wouldn't be able to say, well, we had no way to learn the Torah. Here, yes, they had a way to learn the Torah, and hence, if the Almighty should decide, and you can see actually more along these lines in the beginning of Maseches Avodah Zarah, where the Almighty does approach the Goyim, the nations of the world, questioning why they didn't fulfill the Torah. And now, with this in mind, they can't say, what do you mean, why didn't we fulfill the Torah? We have no way of knowing the Torah. The Torah was written on the stones in 70 languages. But Reb Shimon comments, according to Reb Yehuda's approach, that after the writing, it was covered over, so you're back to square one. The nations of the world could claim, we'll say, advance the claim of ignorance, of we didn't know. And the Torah was covered over. Omar lo. So Reb Yehuda says, Bino Yisera Nosan Bema Kodesh Baruch Hu. The Almighty implanted in the scholars of these 70 nations, of the nations of the world, with not Bino Yisera, extra knowledge, with awareness, with knowledge, and V'shigru no tirin shelen, no tirin are their scholars, were sent V'kilfu es hasid, they scraped off the lime coating, V'hisiuha, and they transcribed whatever was on the stones in what the language familiar to them, each one respectively, and V'al dover zeh nischatem gzar dinam leber shachas. It's because of this, namely that the nations of the world did have access to the contents of the Torah, and their subsequent non-observance, their non-fulfillment, that the decree upon them to bear shachas, to purgatory, was ruled, was concretized, was signed. Shahoyo lahen lilmod v'lo lamdu. They had the means of studying, and they didn't do so. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon, who we saw disagreed with Rabbi Yehuda. Now Rabbi Shimon says, Al Gabi Sid Kosfua. The writing was done on the Sid itself. In other words, the stones were coated, and upon the coating, the Torah was written. The Kosfu Lohen Lamata, and underneath there was a type of caption, if you will, or some type of statement written underneath. Laman asher lo yolamdu eschem lasois kechol v'chulei. This pasuk we've noted on the side of the Gemara. So let's take a look together. Tvarim Perechov. First, we're going to read pasuk Yud Zayin, and then make reference to the pasuk that was just quoted in our Gemara test, pasuk Yud Ches. So together we read on the side. Ki achreim tacharimem hachitiv v'moriya k'nenia prizi hachivim v'yusui kasher tzivcha Hashem Elokecha. The Jewish people were commanded to eliminate, to eradicate the inhabitants of Eretz Canaan, and the pasuk lists the different nations in that area. And pasuk Yilches Leman Asher Lo Yilamdu Eschem Lasus Kechol To'avosam Asher Asu. Why this severe sentence upon the nations of Canaan? Why their elimination? So that they should not be around and be a bad influence, whereby we would learn from their abominable ways. So that is what was written underneath the, we'll say, Torah script. Ha lamadata, we learn from here. She'im hoyu choizrin b'tshuva hoyu mekablen oison. Had the members of these nations atoned, changed their ways, changed their abominable ways, then we would have accepted that. Let's take a look at Rashi. V'kosvu melata b'soif hadaf, under the columns of Torah, leman asher lo yilamdu od, etc. Li'el min eksiv, right before it, we read this in our posuk on the side. Ki achrim tacharimim v'dovar zeh kosvu lemata. This was written, namely posuk Yud Ches was written underneath the Torah that was written on the stones. Lodia l'shiva umois hayoshim chutz migvulei Yisrael, and here we want to place an emphasis on the word chutz. This was to inform members of these 7 nations that dwelled outside the boundaries of the land of Israel. Shalom nitztavu lachrimam. According to this approach, there are other approaches, but according to this approach, the Jewish people were not commanded to eliminate them, those members of the Canaanite people living outside the land. Only those that inhabited the land were to be the subject of this command for destruction. Kidei shelo yilamdu oisanu ma'aseim hamekukolim, so that we shouldn't learn their abominable ways. Avol atem hayoshvim chutzala im atem choyzer b'tshuva. But you who are living outside the boundaries of Israel, members of these 7 nations, if you repent, nikabel eschem, we will accept you. Shebesecha ein mekablin. However, those that were in the land, if they were, let's say, attempt to convert to Judaism, we will not accept them. Shemachmas yira oisen. Their whole motivation is simply out of fear and not out of a commitment to godly truth. So we turn back to the Gemara. Omar Rava Bar Shila, my time of the Rabbi Shimon. What is the basis of Rabbi Shimon that said it's written on the sid, on top of the lime coating? Dichtiv, the pasuk says, "V'hoyu amim misrafois sid." The nations of the world will be burnt like sid. And what's the drasha? Al iske sid. The pasuk in Yeshaya, which is prophetic, is a pasuk describing the destruction of these idolatrous nations because of matters of the sid. That is a hint to the Torah that was written on the sid, that was clear, was exposed to them, and they didn't bother learning it. For Rabbi Yehuda, what's his response? Ki sid. His response, who, after all, his opinion was that the Torah wasn't written on top of the sid, but rather, ma sid ein lo takona elo sreifa, af oison hakusim ein lohem takona elo sreifa. The reference to sid in Yeshaya is a reference to the nations having no takona, no salvation, literally no repair, no hope, other than through being burnt. And that is just like lime. Lime is produced through burning certain type of stone. It's put into a furnace in intense heat, and it eventually disintegrates into powder form, and from that you produce sid. And just like sid is produced no way other than through the fire, so too those kusim, reference to these to idolatrous nations, they have no hope other than through their being burnt. The Gemara asks, Keman Azla Hadesanya, according to whom does the following unnamed source go? The pasuk says, V'shavisa shivyo. The pasuk itself is a reference to the Jewish people if they engage in war. Literally, it means when they capture captives. So, V'shavisa shivyo, this pasuk is L'rabois kenainim shebechutz haaretz. This comes to include the capture of Canaanite people who were captured in wars beyond the boundary of Israel. These are elective wars that we call in Hebrew mechemes hareshus, that the Torah acknowledges can be engaged in. And in such wars, captives might be taken, and amongst the captives you might find people who are of Canaanite ancestry, but they're dwelling outside the land of Israel. She'im choyshin b'tshuva mekablan osam. If they should want to repent, we will accept them. In other words, there is not an automatic decree of killing all Canaanite people, even those outside the land. When we mentioned before that itself was a point of controversy, and here the Gemara, a point of controversy meaning disagreement, here we're asking, according to whom does this approach follow? The Gemara continues at the top of Lamed Vav Amud Aleph, Keman Kerebi Shimon. This conforms to Rabbi Shimon's approach. He is the opinion that we saw in the source quoted just a few lines before, mentioning the instruction to be written underneath the Torah, indicating the possibility of Canaanite people studying the Torah, and if they repent, we will take them back, and that can refer only to Canaanite people living outside the land. Those that lived in the land, according to all opinions, had to be eliminated. There was no other option. The Rashi elaborates on this a bit. First, we look at Rashi, the bottom of Lamed Hamid Beis, several lines up from the bottom of Shavisa Shiv the Rabbis Kanaim Shlutzos, the Krab Chutzos. See, if this pasuk is a reference to wars outside the boundaries of Israel, when you go depart into wars from the land, to outside the land. The pasuk is speaking about an optional war. The language of kiseitse indicates something that when it occurs to you to go, that means something that's elective. The expression Shavisa Shivyo is coming to include Canaanite people, to allow the preservation of those Canaanite people outside the land. They, the Canaanite people outside the land, are not included in the command of Lo Sechaya Kol Neshama, do not leave any of them alive. That is limited to the Canaanites within the boundaries of Israel. And we continue with the Rashi at the top of Lamed Vav Amud Aleph. Keman Rabbi Shimon, the Yomar Shekosalem. Rabbi Shimon was the opinion that indicated that it was to be written Shiachser B'tshuva V'kablim, that if they repent, we will accept them. Alma lo hayu ha'imdim chutz l'gvulim b'chlal lo schaya kol neshama. So you see from here that those Canaanite peoples outside the boundaries of Israel were not included in the command of Lo Sechaya Kol Neshama, leave none of them alive. Aval the Rabbi Yehuda, on the other hand, who did not have this provision for Leman Lo Yolamdu to be written at the bottom. Kulon B'chlal Lo Sechaya, even Canaanite people dwelling outside the land, there would be no acceptance of them. If one in war would encounter them, they were to be eliminated. And this whole concept of elimination, do not forget for 1 second, this is all divine command. It's all because of the Almighty, who is the master of the world, who enables life to continue. When it comes to these peoples and their evil and abominable ways, the Almighty deems it such that they are not to be given the privilege of continuing to exist. With that, we conclude our shiur for today.